History doesn't vanish. It changes quietly. We can hear it being whispered, details being added, perceptions being altered, the dead being reframed. Sometimes, all it takes is one detail to colour those who came before, one strong headline to change how the past is remembered. Language has power far beyond those who wield it, and it's happening right before our eyes.
Last year, the government launched a new diaspora strategy, one that aims to celebrate our diversity. The Irish never were a homogenous group, and identity is never static.
For what truly is history when it is written by the powerful? It's time we look at how history is being dressed in a new language and what that language conceals. Some words carry weight far beyond their academic meaning. They say one thing while concealing another. Histories, once taken as solid, begin to soften. Truths that were unquestionable, stripped, not of error, but of meaning.
In 2025, Ireland's state broadcaster RTE released a documentary titled From That Small Island. Its first episode sought to explore the ancestry of the Irish.
A phenomenal documentary, well made, carefully researched, and widely praised. The issue did not arise in the episode itself, but elsewhere. In an interview with the Irish Times, one of the lead academics described the Irish as, and I quote, "This homogenous Ireland idea, this little Catholic thing, was never the case. We were never homogenous. Always hybrids, always mongrels." Before the documentary is watched, that word is planted. Before the results are screened, the impression is already made. To understand why the Irish are being described this way, we need to ask, why is this language being used at all? Language like this isn't new. Identity has been reframed before. When Christianity arrived to these shores, the stories of our ancestors did not disappear. They were adapted. Ancient meanings recast within a new system. For when the narrative changes, the truth needs to be moulded within it, no matter the cost.
Exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom.
This is not a warning, it's a record. Ireland is no different. We are susceptible to the same flaws. When we are drip-fed the same message over a long enough time, it has enormous power, for it can change the very world around us, how we view each other, our past, and ourselves. See, it doesn't matter if what being said is true or not. What matters is the light it is presented in and the impressions it makes. Even if it's only a seed planted in your mind or a quick eye scanning over newspaper headlines. The reality is, one needs to wade through a lot of noise to find out what is really happening between the lines. Language lingers in how we talk, in how we live, in the spaces we pass through every day. One generation at a time, shaped by language, can significantly alter even the most ancient, continuous cultures. If you can make a people indifferent, not to their enemies, but to their roots, not hateful, not spiteful necessarily, just void of care and pride, then you do not need to erase their history. You just need to reframe it. This requires neither movement nor the sword. This has always been a very human problem. When power shifts, the narrative shifts with it. When the vitality of a people is exhausted, the new successors begin to reorganize the past. Now, we look beneath the language and its possible motivations, to the bones below, to the truth, to find out who really are the Irish. Language dictates how we perceive, but perception can be shattered by truth. In the 2010s, a quiet revolution happened, a new magic that allowed us to look into the materials that make us, into our genes and their sequencing. Now, with this new method, we shall look at what truly is beneath the skin, to what lies within. So, let us explore Ireland's ancestry and what that truly means to us. The story of the Irish begins around 10,000 years ago with a people of the Mesolithic period, known as the Western hunter-gatherers. They arrived in Ireland shortly after the end of the last glacial maximum, at the opening of the Holocene period we still inhabit today. They were largely nomadic communities whose lives were shaped by the land around them. Along the coast, some relied heavily on fish and shellfish, supplemented by hazelnuts, blackberries and other wild fruits. Inland, others hunted within the vast forest that once covered the island. Birch, pine, hazel and oak dominated at different times and regions, forming such dense woodland that later folk memory recalled how one could walk from one side of Ireland to the other without the sun breaking through the canopy. Though closely tied to the rhythms of the forest, these people were not passive inhabitants. Along the River Liffey, in what is now North Dublin, they constructed fish traps to harvest seasonal runs. Their stone toolkits also differed from those of continental Europe, adapting small blades, known as microliths, into band flakes to suit the mammals of the island. Genetically, these early Irish belonged to the European Western hunter-gatherer haplogroup. Their closest known genetic relatives were found among the Scandinavian hunter-gatherers. All carried pale eye pigmentation, mostly blue eyes, yet lacked the genetic variants associated with pale skin, giving them a rather unique look. These hunter-gatherers roamed alone on the island for millennia upon millennia in a symbiotic relationship with the land and its species, until quietly, a people from the south began to use the maritime paths laid during the Mesolithic to journey to the far edges of their world. In a mighty and testing voyage, travelling along the Atlantic corridor, the first farmers moved steadily northward and made their way onto the shores of Ireland. The Neolithic farmers, whose ancestry ultimately traces back to Anatolia and the Levant, began to arrive in Ireland around 4000 BC, some 6,000 years ago. These farmers brought with them domestic animals such as cattle, sheep and pigs, along with cereal crops, which came to largely replace the wild foods relied upon by the hunter-gatherers. Over time, farming reshaped both the land and the rhythms of daily life on the island. They are perhaps best known for the veneration of their ancestral dead, expressed through the construction of megalith tombs. Sites such as Pulnabrana Portal Tomb and Queen Maeve's Cairn on Knocknaria stand out as striking examples, but their monuments were not only for the dead. These communities possessed the knowledge and organisation required to align burial tombs with the movements of the sun. At Newgrange in Brunaboyne, the inner chamber is illuminated at the winter solstice, while Loch Crew Cairn aligns with sunrise at both the spring and autumn equinoxes,
demonstrating a high level of coordination and sophistication.
Genetically, these Irish farmers, like their European counterparts, belong to the early European farmer haplogroup, most likely reaching Ireland via Atlantic routes through Spain rather than central continental paths. Unlike the hunter-gatherers who preceded them, they carried genetic variants associated with lighter skin pigmentation and tended towards brown eyes.
In appearance, a modern Sardinian provides the closest living population comparison.
For millennia, the Irish farmers thrived, passing their way of life and their knowledge of the stars from one generation to the next. Yet beyond the island, the flow of Europe was shifting. From the lower Rhine came new peoples, defined by war, cattle, and thundering horses' hooves. Their movement would eventually reach every corner of the continent, including the far western edge, Ireland. By the early Bronze Age, new populations were on the move, and Ireland was drawn into this wider transformation. Archaeologists refer to this movement as the Bell Beaker phenomenon, named after the distinctive inverted drinking vessels found across the continent. This period marks the first widespread use of bronze, a mix of copper and tin, which gradually reshaped tools, weapons, and status. Yet in Ireland, it is gold that most clearly defines this age. Ornate gold objects, many of which can be seen today in the National Museum of Ireland, speak to wealth, craftsmanship, and far-reaching trade. The megalith traditions of earlier times did not disappear, and found their final expression in the wedge tomb, many of which contain beaker-style pottery dating to the Bronze Age. Stone circles, such as those at Drumbeg in County Cork, may have been used to track the movements of celestial bodies, continuing a long-standing fascination of skyward gaze. Even the Great Passage tombs retain their significance, reused at times for later burials, linking the living to a much older past. However, there is something we cannot ignore. The arrival of Bronze Age populations marked the most dramatic genetic change ever to occur on the island. Around a millennium after the first appearance of Bell Beaker pottery, Ireland experienced a profound population turnover. Up to 90% of Neolithic ancestry was replaced. The causes of this are still debated, but the genetic outcome is clear.
Modern Irish people retain only a small genetic contribution from the Neolithic farmers, architects of Newgrange.
There is no clearer example than Rathlin Man. Discovered on Rathlin Island in 2006, he lived during the early Bronze Age, around 2000 to 1600 BC. In 2016, his genome, along with others from the same site, were sequenced by a research team led from Trinity College Dublin, giving us an unprecedented window into the ancestry of Ireland's Bronze Age population. Rathlin Man lived at a moment when Ireland had become part of a much wider world. He belonged to an early Bronze Age population carrying substantial steppe-related ancestry, tracing back to peoples who had moved from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, far to the east of the continent. These were the same broad populations, often linked with the spread of Indo-European languages across Europe and Asia. Yet Rathlin Man was not simply a newcomer. Within him were older layers of ancestry as well, genetic echoes of Neolithic farmers, continental relatives of the Newgrange architects. By the Bronze Age, these different strands had fused, forming a new population. With Rathlin Man and those like him, the R1b Y chromosome haplogroup appears in Ireland for the first time, a lineage that would later become dominant across the island. Alongside it came biological traits that still shape the Irish today. Milk drinkers, with a higher prevalence of the Celtic disease hemochromatosis. Over the centuries that followed, Ireland was never sealed off from the wider world. From the 8th century onwards, seafaring groups from Scandinavia, known to history as the Vikings, began raiding Christian settlements along the coast, with early attacks recorded at places such as Rathlin Island. Monasteries rich in portable wealth and lightly defended were frequent targets. Over time, raiding gave way to settlement, and Viking groups became embedded within Ireland's existing political landscape, participating in dynastic rivalries and military alliances. Their cultural impact was profound. From these settlements emerged Ireland's modern towns, including Dublin, which developed into a major Hiberno-Norse centre. Under rulers such as Sigtryggr Silkenbeard, Dublin even saw the introduction of coinage modelled on Anglo-Saxon examples. Genetically, however, the Viking legacy in Ireland appears minimal. Early studies identified only a small Scandinavian contribution.
And while more recent autosomal DNA analyses, which looks at total ancestry, have detected a greater degree of Viking Age ancestry than previously recognised,
this signal reflects complex population movements in both directions, including Irish gene flow into Norway during the Viking period. In other words, contact was real, but it did not amount to large-scale population change. Later arrivals, including the Anglo-Normans, followed a similar pattern. Their influence was largely political and cultural, concentrated among elite strata, rather than demographic upheaval. None of these later movements displaced the population that had already formed in the Bronze Age. Instead, they were absorbed into it. Taken together, the genetic evidence shows that modern Irish ancestry derives from an early and stable blend of 3 prehistoric populations: Western hunter-gatherers, early European farmers, and steppe-derived Bronze Age peoples, a synthesis that had largely formed by around 2000 BC and remained broadly continuous thereafter.
in reality, what emerges is not a state of ongoing replacement or hybridization, but of a stable population shaped early and carried forward through time.
In genetic terms, the Irish are not an unfinished mixture, but the result of Europe settling into a stable form at its western edge. Rathlin Man, for example, points to a degree of genetic continuity stretching back over 4,000 years at the western edge of Europe, as concluded by Cassidy and colleagues in their 2016 genetic study. The evidence shows layered ancestry. In population genetics, mixture is the norm, but in everyday language, words like mongrel carry meaning far beyond biology. What the Irish genetic record reveals is early synthesis followed by long continuity. It does not show constant demographic churn or mass replacement, and it does not show the loss of identity. Complexity is not chaos. Some words carry weight far beyond their academic meaning. If the evidence points to continuity, why does the story so often sound like a loss? At this point, the evidence is clear. The question is no longer what happened, but how it is framed. When the same language appears beyond Ireland, across different countries and debates, it ceases to be accidental.
It becomes a pattern, and once you begin to notice it, you can't look away.
Across the continent, the same language repeats itself. Different countries, different past. England, Scandinavia, yet the framing is familiar. Roots are loosened, continuity recast, always in the name of progress. Scientists speak carefully, in facts and data. They deal in probabilities, caveats, and context, but that language rarely survives transmission. Across Europe, the same patterns repeat. Research becomes headline, and headline becomes ideology. The distortion doesn't mostly happen in the lab. it happens after. The distortion process starts when new information is discovered. Shortly after, it begins a transformation. It becomes shaped by those with the skills to process it, forged through the systems required to extract facts. But once those facts enter institutions of power, of social control, whether political, cultural, media, the conditions that produce them are stripped away. Now the information becomes vulnerable, open to those with the power to reshape the world in their image. It can be bent, reframed, and redeployed by the architects of the story. And arguing facts within these systems can be futile because the institutions themselves determine how the facts are told, and their storytelling is effective.
Narrative, repeated enough over time, becomes stronger than memory, stronger than inheritance.
Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. I know that espionage, intelligence gathering, looks more romantic. It's a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country.
Subversion rarely takes much. One glance at a headline, one reel, one TikTok is all it takes. A seed planted, a single drop of water in the ocean that changes the current. And once institutions absorb a narrative, this pattern repeats. Each repetition reinforces the frame. That glance at the headlines becomes prime-time shows, until questioning no longer sounds like curiosity, but treachery to the story itself. This doesn't always require a conspiracy or coordination. It only requires leverage.
Once a way of speaking about the past becomes politically convenient, it propagates.
Not because it was formally agreed upon, but because it rewards those who adopt it. Some push it deliberately, others absorb it unconsciously. And when language outruns evidence, and is repeated often enough, it hardens into something that feels indistinguishable from truth. This isn't a trial, nor is it an attempt to deny complexity or silence disagreement. It is simply an observation of how language, once socially acceptable, begins to organize reality itself. How the words we repeat do more than describe the past. They shape how we see it, and in time, how we live within it. From the meadows of Wicklow to the cliffs of Moher, and all in between, the land reverberates with the stories, lives, and sacrifices of our ancestors, whose traditions and language evolved alongside the same Atlantic winds that still move across the island today.
The Irish stand not as a flexible category, but as a living archive of the European people, a unique relative, yet ultimately a thread woven into a far larger family.
As kingdoms fell and different clans reigned supreme, a cultural undercurrent persisted for epochs, one that wove the generations together under shared systems. From the Bronze Age onwards, genetic continuity was mirrored by deep social continuity as well, not as a single institution or structure, but a way of ordering the world that only faded relatively recently in modern history. The philologist Jorge Dumézil would later identify this underlying order as a tripartite system. At its head stood a judicial and priestly function, embodied in Ireland by the Druids, custodians of law, ritual, and cosmic order. Alongside them existed a warrior function, compelled by obligation, with an undercurrent of semi-nomadic warrior bands of the Manor-Bund tradition, expressed in the Irish na Fianna. Beneath both stood the productive and fertile function, those who worked the land of their ancestors, sustaining society through labour, cattle and continuity, a very Indo-European system bound from the Norse to the Indo-Iranians.
This underlying structure persisted in increasingly Christianized and secular forms for centuries, adapting and reshaping itself within a new religious framework.
It endured, not unchanged but recognisable, until the early modern period, when the Tudor crown smashed the remaining Gaelic legal, social and cultural orders of the 17th century. So far in this documentary, you may have noticed my limited use of the term Celtic.
There is good reason for this. Celtic has become a term that means both everything and nothing.
In the 19th and early 20th centuries, historians stretched it far beyond its limits, as J.R.R. Tolkien once observed. With justified suspicion, it became a magic bag into which anything may be put, and out of which almost anything may come. Over time, Celtic was inflated to contain almost anything one wished to explain or dismiss. From the fantasies of British Israelism, which claimed the Celts were the lost tribe of Israel, to racial theories that framed Celticness as emotional instability or civilizational immaturity. The word survived, the evidence beneath often did not. Even to speak of Celtic mythology is not to imply closed unity. Celtic scholar Pruntius McKenna considered it as unrealistic to think that the Irish myths did not contain a substratum of pre-Celtic traditions and beliefs. The continuity of sacredness around passage tombs from the Neolithic is still evident today. People walk cautiously around the mounds of old, for they don't want to catch the attention of the good people or the Sidhe. Ultimately, Celtic is best understood as a linguistic term, and in the case of Gaeilge, the timing of its arrival on the island remains debated. As discussed, genetic evidence shows a major turning point in the Bronze Age,
perhaps marking the first arrival of an Indo-European language, ancestral to Irish, some 1500 years before the appearance of the Hallstatt.
From all we looked at, demoralization works by misframing. It teaches people to see inheritance as guilt and lineage as something to apologize for. But identity grounded in truth does not need defense. Ireland is European, and it is distinct. Neither claim weakens the other. What emerges is not opposition, it's the sovereignty of self-understanding, of self-respect for all those who came before. For, if it wasn't for them, we would simply not exist. And I think existence, with all its troubles, is something worthy to be grateful for. If demoralization begins when pride and heritage are recast as guilt, remoralization begins when identity is realigned with truth. The monks once reframed Irish pagan identity through a Christian lens. The nationalists of the 19th and 20th century later reframed us as Celtic, defined in opposition to Germanic England. Perhaps it is time to reforge our line once more, to move beyond the narrow container of Celtic and to speak plainly, to call ourselves simply Irish, distinct, European and old enough to be seen anew. Whatever label we may cast unto our identity does not take away from our deep connection to the land. A people interwoven with a land that was graced by the first poems of Aumorgan the Milesian. A people interwoven with the soil that Eru and her tribe of Danu tread upon. An island whose temples are illuminated on the solstices, echoing the visions of ancestors across space and time. And most crucially, a people who are heirs to an ancient language that evolved alongside the very land and soil in which our forebears are buried.
Ní Rama Reeve Ian, Ní Rama Reeve Mongol. Is múntrár lei sin agus orpacht ó líb na génolaíochta. Thugann siad Mongol air, golíonn sé mín rúltach air. Ní leis na hinstitútaí an scéal seo, na leis na hacadóirí féin, ní leis na ceanlínta an scéal seo. Is leis na duine óháirí. Is leis an bobal eranach scéal na hero. Ireland's story belongs to the Irish people.
Smata